Two questions from Esim. First question. If I assume that consciousness is separate, I ask myself the following. What if we would change places? One day I wake up in the morning as Francis and you wake up as Esim. Only a thought experiment. Would the consciousness be aware of this change? I think it wouldn't, isn't it? And it had no possibility to know that a change has happened. I would be aware of your mind world thinking I am on this chair in Temecula, and you would be aware of my thoughts and would have the feeling that they are yours, as only thoughts say such thing as mine, me, you. If there is no possibility to realize this change, then we could also say, how do we know that this is not happening all the time, and how do we know that it is not already the same consciousness? Exactly. Precisely. When you get identified with the mind, you can get identified with the mind in two ways. Maya way or avidya way. The way of the illusion or the way of ignorance. In the way of the illusion, it seems that you are a separate mind, but you know at the same time the independence of consciousness with regard to this mind. The mind is appearing, but at the same time you are not losing the connection with the deep background behind which we all share. In the way of ignorance, you are losing this contact. You are losing the peace. You are lost. So that's the difference. It is true that it is the same consciousness which is in both. So the question doesn't even arise to be in one and then in another. You see, if I have a mind one and mind two, and if there are two consciousnesses, let's say consciousness one and consciousness two, right? What you're suggesting, and there can be a couple, mind one, consciousness one, and then mind two, consciousness two, or there can be a couple, mind one, consciousness two, and mind two, consciousness one. But if you don't have this distinction between consciousness one and consciousness two, there is no difference. You have consciousness mind one and consciousness mind two. If you switch consciousness, it doesn't change anything. You see? So your thought experiment kind of makes the assumption of the existence of separate consciousnesses. Since there are no separate consciousnesses, it is the same. You cannot actually reach any conclusion from this thought experiment. The conclusion you reach it in your practical life once you have realized the utter independence of consciousness and its absolute reality that trumps the reality of the mind and that trumps the reality of the universe. So then, and then alone, and only then, can you simultaneously experience the object of Maya without being in ignorance, meaning simultaneously experiencing the peace and the reality of consciousness or presence. Now, but that wasn't his final question. Now the question about this thought play. What is then liberated in Francis and is not liberated in Essim? Francis' body-mind system, consciousness is free. Consciousness doesn't need to be liberated. Consciousness, upon hearing these words, may choose to see its freedom or may choose to keep playing the game of being separate. But that is only a choice of the infinite freedom of consciousness. Because consciousness has the choice, consciousness is always free. So that which is free cannot become liberated. That which is free is free. Only that which is not free can become liberated. So consciousness cannot become liberated either in Francis nor in Essim because it is free. The body-mind system is not free. It is dependent upon consciousness. So the body-mind system cannot either become liberated. However, it can be realigned. In other words, it can be the way we perceive, the way we act, the way we feel can be or may not be consistent with consciousness being universal. Due to residues of ignorance, usually there are belief systems in the mind or of the mind and patterns in the body, patterns of perception, patterns of feelings that are consistent with a separate entity, with a separate consciousness, that artificially create a distinction between self and non-self. That which is me, these bodies, this mind, these thoughts, that which is not me, other people, the universe that surrounds this body. So that can be realigned over time, and we can cooperate to this realignment. When that is done, the body-mind also participates in the celebration. As long as the body-mind has these separating patterns, it cannot really dance freely to celebrate. Second question. If happiness is one with consciousness, is the following practice a good idea to do? I investigate into unhappiness and looking if the thoughts and problems are the result of a personalized point of view. Every time I can then see that this view tries to protect an image of a person, a property of my person, I can dissolve as not real experientially. It can dissolve as not real experientially. What is left is automatically happiness. Instead of getting happiness, I have to let go of unhappy ideas and stop resisting unhappiness. Well, part of what you're suggesting, I would suggest also that every time you feel unhappiness, you can investigate and discover, without exception, that the thoughts and problems are the result of a personalized point of view. After some time, you will have reached this conviction that every time you experience psychological suffering, you can trace it back to this belief or this feeling to be a separate, a limited consciousness. Now, this belief or this feeling of being a separate consciousness is not going to dissolve unless you have investigated it and it has revealed itself to be false. The way, so that's the most important part of the search. It is this investigation. The first part is easy, the one you mentioned, to discover that every time we believe to be a separate consciousness, down the road it generates misery. That's already good because you have diagnosed the source of the problem. But now you have to eliminate the source of the problem. The source of the problem, the belief to be a separate entity, cannot really be eliminated, because if it is true that I am a separate consciousness, then I am doomed to hell. I am doomed. There is no way, since every time I believe to be a separate consciousness, I experience psychological suffering, if it is true that I am a separate consciousness, I'm cooked. Fortunately, through the exploration, I will discover as a first step that there is no evidence whatsoever that this consciousness of mine is separate and limited. We have to undertake this investigation again and again so that we can go deeper and deeper, more and more deeply into it. And that has to take place at all levels, at the level of thoughts, but also at the level of feelings and at the level of perception. At some point there is a complete not knowing. And in this not knowing, we will get the certainty that consciousness is not personal. That's a part of grace. That's a part for which the mind is totally powerless. This revelation cannot be brought about by the mind. At some point, the mind reaches this stillness, this not knowingness, this cloud of not knowing, this cloud of unknowing. And that's when, in the stillness of the mind, the revelation comes. Or, alternately, as an alternate way, we can also conduct experiments in our life, trying to change our ways and to act and to try to think and believe and try to think and feel and perceive as if consciousness were universal, and then see what happens. So that's also a different approach. So what you what you are suggesting is good, but it is only a first step. The other step, the one that you are mentioning, you may reach some fleeting moments of happiness, but again, because the root cause has not been eliminated, which is a belief to be a separate consciousness, misery will still be waiting for you on the path.